Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Caroline Smith. I am our Manager of Public Programs at the York County History Center. Thank you all for joining us. We're very excited for this collaboration between the York JCC and the York County History Center. And this specific program will get to highlight histories that may not have been brought to the forefront previously. And don't forget, we'll have a short question and answer period at the end. Please say your name and stand when you're asking those questions.
If you are able. Hi. Good evening. We do ask that you please silence your cell phones, and restrooms are just outside to the right. And on behalf of Caroline and myself, Iris Katz from the York JCC, and our staff, we welcome you to this very special program. And we're so pleased to have partnered with the York History Center on this aspect of hidden histories. And we welcome you to a very special program entitled this evening, York's Jewish History. We're so fortunate to have two very knowledgeable presenters this evening, Gordon Freirich and Lou Laviton. Gordon Freirich is a third-generation Yorker who has been a newspaper editor and longtime columnist. He has been on the boards of Temple Beth Israel, as well as the JCC and Four Chaplains Prayer Breakfast. He has researched and conducted walking tours of the historic Jewish sites in the downtown York area. Lou Laviton is fourth generation at the JCC, being a former board member, and he is the co-chair of the Four Chaplains Breakfast. And there will be time at the end for brief questions and comments. Thank you for joining us this evening, and with no further ado, Gordon Freirich.
Just wanted to make sure the blooms could see me. So, welcome this evening. We're so glad to see all of you here. There are a number of native Yorkers here, so if I say anything that's incorrect, correct me afterwards, but not during the public portion. We also appreciate you missing Jeopardy tonight. We're going to try to do about 260 years of York's Jewish history in about 20 minutes, so it may sound like a train going down the track at times. If you have any trouble hearing me or understanding me, just let me know. And I will start with that. York's hidden Jewish history isn't so hidden if you know where to look. York's Jewish history predates the founding of the nation. In 1755, only 100 years after the first Jews arrived in North America from Brazil, it is believed a Jewish fur trader and trapper named Henry Frank would have been active along the Codorus Creek in the village then called Yorktown. In 1759, just 18 years after the founding of the rustic village of Yorktown, in 1741, a newly married couple, Elijah and Shina Edding, had a first slide, please. Elijah and Shina Edding lived in New York and had a retail shop and home in the second block of what is now West Market Street. Shina was the daughter of a well-known Lancaster man named Joseph Solomon. The 35-year-old Elijah is described in the history of the Jews of Lancaster as being the only Jew living in New York at the time he married 15-year-old Shina, and bringing her across the mild, wide Susquehanna River to his home in New York. Elijah and Shina Edding became well known in the community. Shina was mentioned in Alexander Graven's writing about his York visit during his tour of Colonia, Pennsylvania in 1773. Graydon described Shina as sprightly and engaging. I think judging from her portrait, I would add formidable to that. Elijah and Shina had 8 children born in New York before Elijah's death in 1778. In 1780, the widow and children moved to Baltimore, where one of the sons, Solomon Edding, would be responsible for writing what became known as the Jewish laws, prohibiting discrimination of public office holders based on religion in Maryland. I understand there's also a Edding Street in Maryland. Shina died in Baltimore in 1833. After the Eddies, there were no known Jews in York County until about 1826, when a small group of Jews from Bulgaria moved to, of all places, Hanover, where they formed a congregation which requires 10 men a million in attendance to conduct services. By 1829, there were about 13 families. Over the years, that number grew and shrunk until the mid-20th century. After meeting in several different locations, in 1949 they purchased a home on 2nd Avenue as a sanctuary and classroom. I clearly remember in the late 1950s my older brother driving to Hanover on Sunday mornings to teach Hebrew school there. Over the years, the number of Jews in Hanover dwindled, and today there are only a few members of the faith remaining there. A new wave arrived in New York. When Nathan Lehmeyer and other Jews arrived in New York from Germany in 1847, most were merchants, one of the few occupations available to European Jews at the time. Many lived by an old expression. Am I getting static?
Sorry about that.
Many lived by an old Jewish expression. Is that better? Keep your education in your brain, your merchandise on your back, and your religion in your heart. And Nate, when you stop this.
I'm gonna switch out the mic.
Thank you. If it crackles now, it's me, not the mic. In 1877, this growing group of Jews would form the Hebrew Reform Congregation, which became Temple Beth Israel, the House of Israel. Over the next 50 years, other Jewish immigrants, many from Eastern Europe, would make their way to York. In 1879, the Orthodox congregation Ashi Hadash, People Faith, was established. For example, my grandfather arrived in York around 1895 because close and extended family members had preceded him to the community. At one time, between 1903 and the 1960s, York had 3 synagogues, 3 separate congregations, within a few hundred yards of one another. Next slide, please. Adas Israel, Congregation Israel, an Orthodox congregation chartered in 1879 as Anshi Hadash, built a synagogue in 1903, located on Pershing Avenue, about a half block north of College Avenue and close to Penn Common. When it was built in 1903, the street would have been called Water Street because it runs along the doors. It would be a neighbor of Smallwood Elementary School, then designated for African American students. The building was small and would have appeared similar to European synagogues of that time. The interior, to my mind, was somewhat dark. Because of its size, it would come to be known in the Jewish community as a little shul, the Yiddish word for synagogue. Ohel Sholom, Lovers of Peace, next slide please, was founded as another Orthodox congregation in 1902 and split from Anshi Hadash. The congregation built a synagogue a short distance further north of Adas Israel on the corner of Princess Street and Pershing Avenue in 1904. They were literally just yards apart. In contrast to Adas Israel, Ohel Sholom was bright and airy. This photograph, next slide please, from 1934 shows a synagogue for the dedication of its redecoration. It had already been 30 years since it built, and the installation of its longtime rabbi, Moses Friedman. Rabbi Friedman would years later become active in New York's community, especially the Arles Twinning Association program. My father and grandfather are also shown in this photo. Ohel featured 2 large, round, stained glass windows at its east and west ends, featuring the Star of David design. With those windows and the stained glass windows on both sides, it was filled with light, or as light and airy as it could be expected in those days before air conditioning. I can tell you during the holidays it got very hot. Ohel Sholom was built as an Orthodox synagogue. As such, it had a balcony on 3 sides where the women would sit, separated from the men on the first floor. Ohov would become a conservative Jewish congregation in 1953. In 1907, Temple Beth Israel, although the oldest of the three congregations, founded in 1877, was the last to build its sanctuary. The location was the second block of South Beaver Street at Newton Avenue. Have the next slide, please. It was quite literally around the corner from the other two congregations. Its exterior and interior were more elaborate than the other two buildings. The stained glass windows were created by Rudy Glass and are still visible today on the Newton Alley side of the building, including one featuring Masonic details. Per tradition, the Ark holding tours was on the eastern wall in each of the three synagogues. George Prow, the author and historian, mentions the three synagogues in his 1907 History of York County. Extrapolating his report on the number of male members of each synagogue, it can be calculated there were approximately 100 Jewish families in York at the time. Interestingly, in Prowl's companion volume of biographies, the only Jewish person's biography in the 3-inch thick book is that of Nathan Laymeyer, the York merchant. The bio states he was a member of Temple Beth Israel. Of the three original synagogues, Temple Beth Israel is the only one that still exists today, although as a church. All Jewish symbols have been removed or covered over. The proximity of the synagogues would have made sense back then, as most of the families would have lived within walking distance of their houses of worship. As I look out, I see several families from that era. They all lived around that area. A 6 or 7 block walk was not a long walk. Adas Israel and Ohov Sholom were demolished at different times to make way for an expanding William Penn Senior High School, which now covers most of Pershing Avenue. When Temple Beth Israel moved to Hollywood Drive in 1962, Adas Israel, for a period of time, purchased and moved into the South Beaver Street building. With a dwindling older membership, Adas Israel would eventually merge with Ohov Sholom. All have moved to a new building on Eastern Boulevard in 1968. In 2003, Ohov moved out of that building and would thereafter conduct services at the York JCC and later at TBI. Today, Rabbi Melody Davis, who came to TBI last July, conducts services for TBI on Friday evenings and Ohov Sholom on Saturday mornings. York's oldest Jewish cemetery was and is still owned by and maintained by Temple Beth Israel. It is located on South George Street near Jackson Street. You probably passed it a million times and didn't know it was there. Just a wrought iron fence around in the front. There's not been a burial there in many, many years. There are two cemeteries located along Starcross Road, south of York. One is South Hill Hebrew Cemetery. The other is a Catholic cemetery. Hence the name of the road, Starcross. Star for the Star of David and cross for the Catholic symbol. See, you learned something. Prior to World War II, as anti-Semitism became more aggressive across Europe in the 1930s, more Jews sought refuge in the United States and some moved to York. Alexander D. Good was rabbi of Temple Beth Israel in the late 1930s and early 40s. A community activist, he advocated breaking down religious, racial, and social barriers in the community. He may have been too far ahead of his congregation in that respect. In late 1942, he resigned his pulpit and joined the chaplaincy program. He was one of the 4 chaplains aboard the UST Dorchester who gave up their life jackets and gloves and died together when their ship was torpedoed by a Nazi submarine in February 1943. You'll hear more about that shortly. Many other York Jews went to war. After the war, Ohov Sholom created a large plaque for the front of the pulpit, the bima, with the names of the Jewish men from the congregation who served in the war. Congregants lost many relatives in the Holocaust, and their names were included and inscribed on memorial plaques attached to the walls of the synagogue. Following the war, a number of Holocaust survivors found a home in New York. Today, the Ark frame from Ohov Sholom is in the lobby of Weinstein Realty on Cherry Lane, and the Veterans Memorial plaques are in storage in the building. The York Jewish Community Center traces its founding to the formation of the Young Men's and Young Women's Hebrew Association in 1910. Next slide, please. The JCC did not have a permanent home until moving to 36 South Queen Street in 1925. That is now the home of the Mental Health Association of York County. Take that for what you will. In 1952, the JCC moved around the corner to 120 East Market Street, where it purchased the former York YWCA building with its indoor swimming pool. Before moving from Queen Street, larger Jewish receptions were, before moving from Queen Street, larger Jewish receptions were often held at the Malta Temple building in the 200 block of East Market Street, later the site of the corporate office for the J.E. Baker Company, next to the current York County History Center. At 120 East Market Street, the JCC offered a popular preschool program patronized by the Jewish and non-Jewish communities. It became the hub of York's Jewish social life, with its meeting room, gymnasium auditorium, teen lounge, scout room, snack and man snack bar, and Hebrew and Sunday school classrooms on the 3rd floor. In 1989, the New York JCC built a facility on Hollywood Drive next to the Temple Beth Israel. You're sitting in it now. The people and businesses. At one time, York had its own kosher meat market and delicatessen. Gollenbeck's was on the corner of King and Pine Streets. The owner, Ben Gollenbeck, was married to my maternal grandmother's sister. Small world. My brother worked there for years. My employment there lasted only a few months, and I was primarily the bagel boy, filling the bagel bins in the front window as they were depleted. Ben Gollenbeck eventually sold to another Jewish butcher, who then moved the business to the Village Green Shopping Center in East York and across the street from where all of Sholem had relocated. The new business, the purchase business, did not survive. Nathan Lehmeyer, again his name comes up, opened a clothing store in 1847 in a prominent location on the northeast corner of East Market Street on what is today Continental Square. In 1945, this, I'm not sure which slide we're at here. We missed the second JCC picture. Okay. I haven't perfected that eyes in the back of my head routine yet, so I'm working on it. Doesn't work with my wife, and it doesn't work here. In 1945, the store was moved to a location next to the Strand Theater on North George Street. Today, the Appel Center box office is in that location. The original Grumbacher owned Bon-Ton. Next slide, please. Bon-Ton is idiomatic French for good taste or stylish. Opened in the first block of West Market Street in 1889. Is that the Freisinger? Is that the Freisinger building?
I don't think so.
Yes, that's the
That's
Freisinger.
the price.
That's the Freisinger building for those Yorkers. It opened in the first block of West Market Street in 1889. Today, that's the Freisinger building. I think it's a Rite Aid. Later, we moved down the street to the corner of Market and Beaver Street. I always found it enjoyable and ironic that the traditional Christmas season did not begin in New York until the night the animated holiday displays were literally unveiled in the Bon-Ton's windows. If you drive out West Philadelphia Street to its intersection with Carlisle Avenue, you will come face to face with what is now Dream Rights. Originally built as a farmer's market, it later became the Bernstein Sewing Factory, which is one of a number of sewing businesses that would be operated by members of the York Jewish community across the years. In the 1950s and early 60s, there were a number of Jewish-owned businesses in the downtown York area. As I paged through the Polk directories at the York County History Center archives, these businesses were brought back to life. Of course, Lehmeyer's was still in existence. Other retail stores included Hollander's, Leinhart Brothers Furniture, Jack's, York's Leading Women's Clothing Store. Blattner Photo Studio, Saul Kessler's Music Store, Terminal Luggage, I know Gary's here, Hochberger's Children Clothing, Weinbroom Jewelers, Samuelson's Meat Market, which was not kosher, among others in each direction from Continental Square. Epstein builders were prolific in the 1960s and the following years, developing Haynes Acres, Tri-Hill, Randolph Park, Brandywine, Shiloh East, and Marlboro West, in all creating more than 2,500 homes, according to Don Epstein's obituary. A number of Jewish residents were prominent in their fields in the community. Attorney Herbert Cohen became the first Jewish member of the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. His brother Milton Cohen was a well-respected physician in York. Ben Lavin, you'll hear about that later, was very active in the York community, was included with other influential individuals on the original Rotary Club of York mural on the side of the Yorktown Hotel. Otto Lewin was managing director of Cold Steel on Mouse Mill Road and was very well respected and influential in the Jewish community. For all their advantages over the years, there was still discrimination faced by Jews as to where they could live and which organizations or clubs they could join. Thankfully, in the 21st century, that is overtly just a memory, a part of history. Today, the total number of Jews, or those who identify as Jewish, in York County is not easy to qualify. Best estimates and the guesstimates by synagogues and JCC membership is about 450 families and individuals, but that may be an overestimation. Of the total membership at the York JCC today, less than 10% are Jewish. Today, there are more Jews involved in various professions rather than a shrinking retail base, and they are younger and more involved. That's good for the Jewish population and for York's future, helping to keep it fluid and diverse as it moves into the future. And the Jewish community has not forgotten its ties to Rabbi Alexander D. Good. Over the past half a dozen or so years, Temple Beth Israel has basically adopted the Alexander D. Good School, built in 1955, located in one of the most in-need areas of York City. In the past few years, TBI members have converted a large, overgrown courtyard into an environmental classroom and garden. They've also provided pencils, crayons, and notebooks at the beginning of each school year. Thanks to a Doing Good for Good fund at the temple, the school has been supplied with clothing and hygiene supplies for the students. The ongoing relationship between the temple and the school is a tangible way for the York Jewish community to remember its past and help York build its future. Thank you.
If I'm too loud, someone has to wave and let me know. First off, by the way, thank you very much, Gordon. I now know where Water Street is. I have spent an inordinate amount of time trying to track that down, and I still need to hear more about that. There was a lot of families who lived on Water Street and around that area, so thank you for that. Thank you to the History Center for helping putting all this together. I'm going to cover a couple of different topics, ranging from the four chaplains to the Labaton family. All of them still revolve around the same thing that we talk about, the chaplains, is service over self. So we'll do the first little video that I have for you, if you would please.
The Four Chaplains Memorial of York County is a local organization that's dedicated to honoring four men who gave their lives helping others when the SS Dorchester was torpedoed 79 years ago. The group works to honor people who give back in the community and help young folks achieve their goals.
These were four men from various faith backgrounds who, in a time of need, were able to put whatever differences in what made their faith current aside for the greater good of people.
Dr. Tana Andre is one of the people the Four Chaplains Memorial of York County has helped with a scholarship. The Four Chaplains helped other soldiers get on lifeboats and gave up their life jackets after the ship they were on was torpedoed by the Germans during World War II. One of the chaplains, Rabbi Alexander Good, left York's Temple Beth Israel to serve in the war. The York-based group now helps students like Dr. Andre who have attended the elementary school named in Good's honor.
Specifically, the scholarship is geared toward, students in certain demographics in certain areas, and I think it's important for them to have that encouragement to know that, whatever they are dreaming, whatever they are believing for, that it's possible.
The Four Chaplains Memorial Organization has been helping students with scholarships since 2001. In 2011, an endowment was created to award scholarships every year for students who attended Good Elementary School and graduated from William Penn High School. Rabbi Good's legacy is at the core of the group's Legion of Honor program. The mission? Well, the mission is to recognize and encourage acts of volunteerism, brotherhood, and sacrifice among people of every age group and station of life.
The living garden, which was planted with certain colors to reflect core values. So it is built in a circle for unity, which is one of the tenets that the Four Chaplains put out. So they say service to all people, regardless of race or faith, symbolizing to all Americans for all time that there's unity.
Cher Condor was honored in 2014 for her work in creating the Gold Star Garden. She's one of the more than 30 people given the award in recognition of exceptional selfless service to the community and to a spirit of interfaith cooperation. 2019 honoree John Bailey says the work he does isn't about awards.
We just enjoy, using our different businesses to be able to help nonprofits. That's the kind of stuff that makes you want to get out of bed in the morning. When you see that the little bit that Bailey Coach and the Bailey family can do to make differences.
The Four Chaplains Memorial of York County 30th Anniversary Celebration Gala is May 11th. It is a youth breakfast as well that takes place on May 12th. We have information on how you can get involved on our website, fox43.com. You can also find more stories about the Four Chaplains on our website as well.
Go to the next slide. Don't write down those dates. There'll be a time for you to write down this year's dates, which is May the 8th. So that's a shameless plug for the Four Chaplains breakfast. The Four Chaplains comprised of Alexander D. Good, Lieutenant George Fox, Lieutenant Clark Poling, and Lieutenant John P. Washington. Different religions, and we'll tell a little bit more about the story. The next slide is a little bit more addition, and I will go back to something like Gordon said again, that I think Rabbi Good was way ahead of his time. This was the late 1930s and early 1940s. And if you look at what's been going on in the past 3 to 5 years, you can see that he was light years ahead of his time. What I want to do here is, let me do it this way. What I want to do is introduce Charles Walter David Jr. He was on the USS Comanche. He is credited with saving over 50% of the 200 lives of the soldiers who were survived the Dorchester sinking. Of the Dorchester sinking, 900 did not make it. Okay, it was the single largest loss of life next to I think it was Iwo Jima is what I recall hearing. He died 4 days later after he went into the water. As I liked his favorite TV program, he ran into the fire. He ran into the water, jumped into the water, and saved over 90 men. Brought them over to the net. He was a black. Coast Guard, or he wasn't Coast Guard, he would have been a cook. He would have been at the bottom of the ship. He got to the top of the ship. The Comanche was first on the site, and he helped bring them in. He died 4 days later, unfortunately, of pneumonia. And there was a book written about him, and I'm going to just introduce a little bit about that. But to understand who he was, there are awards, and you'll hear about that coming up for this year. So let's play that one, please.
In 1943, a Nazi U-boat in the North Atlantic Sea hunted the SS Dorchester with more than 900 soldiers on board. Surviving a torpedo attack in these frigid waters in winter would require a miracle. and the sacrifice of the men who became known as the Immortal Chaplains. Their celebrated true account is now joined for the first time in print by the largely untold story of another hero, Charles Walter David Jr., a young black petty officer aboard the Coast Guard cutter traveling with the Dorchester. Charles bravely dived into the glacial water over and over again, even with hypothermia setting in, to try and rescue the men the chaplains had inspired to never give up. Page-turning and inspiring, The Immortals is the World War II story told in an engrossing nonfiction narrative of 5 fearless heroes, the sinking of the Dorchester, and an awe-inspiring rescue.
So Rabbi Good, just for a little bit more background on what Gordon put together, Rabbi Good was born May the 10th, 1911 in Washington, D.C., the son of a rabbi. When he was young, his parents divorced. He went to Eastern High School in Washington, D.C., where he earned medals in tennis, swimming, track, and was an excellent student. In his earliest days, he planned to follow in his father's footsteps of being a rabbi. He earned his Bachelor of Arts degree from the University of Cincinnati in 1934 and a degree from Hebrew Union College in 1937. Virtually penniless as a college student during the Great Depression, Alexander contemplated quitting school and giving up his dream to become a rabbi, but he didn't believe that was God's plan for him, so he pursued his religious vocation. For much of his youth, he served in the National Guard to help make ends meet. In 1935, he and his childhood sweetheart, Teresa Flax, daughter of a rabbi and niece of the singer and motion picture star Al Jolson, were married. His first assignment as rabbi was in Marion, Indiana. Later, he moved to Beth Israel Synagogue in Pennsylvania, where he excelled and crossed the dividing between religions. And this is a real important part because I'm going to bring this back up. He further demonstrated by forming the chapter, Boy Scout chapter 37. And I'll, again, go through this just a little bit more in depth. This was the nation's first non-denominational interracial Boy Scout troop. Non-denominational and interracial Boy Scout troop. We recently had a writer in from Washington who was doing an article on the 4 chaplains and met with Barry Friedland from Crispus Attucks. And you should have heard Barry's enthusiasm because he was one of the first black kids to be able to join Troop 37. So that's a little bit on the history of Rabbi Good. Now I'm going to kind of twist things around here for you a little bit. If you go to the next slide. This is my great-grandfather, Lewis Laverton, to whom I'm named after. Much of the Laverton history goes hand in hand with the history of the 4 chaplains' prayer breakfast. It's my great-grandfather. He was president of the board from 1925 to 1929. It was said that around the dinner table that during that period of time, things were getting rough, and beginning with 1925 and as soon as the Great Depression, anti-Semitism was on a rise again. Anti-Semitism increases when times get difficult. Lewis and the rest of the founders of the JCC had an ultimate goal. Their ultimate mission and vision would be today is having all people of all faiths coming together and pray together. He wanted the community to serve him, that served him so well, he wanted to try to give back, to demonstrate, literally I've heard this before, that Jews don't have horns. And that was what was thought during that time. Gordon mentioned Hanover, and I can tell you about stories in Red Lion where we would see the KKK, marching to their meetings, white robe and all. He spoke greatly about the responsibility of giving back to the community that served him so well and pleasing the community. It is said that later in the 1930s, Lewis was instrumental along with the others like Harry Welber, Dave Welber's dad, and Bernie Seville. Most of you may remember, or some of you may remember Danny Blank. Danny Blank was married to Bernie Seville's daughter. And I'll go into a little bit more detail about that in a little bit. But he decided to bring all faiths together, and interesting, they chose the Boy Scouts to do it. Whether you know or not, the Boy Scouts were segregated, and Jews belonged to Jewish Boy Scouts, Catholics belonged to Catholic Boy Scouts, and this was the beginning of the non-Jewish membership to the JCC, even though at this point they did not have a building. They did meet at, as Gordon had pointed out, at 36 South Queen Street, which is where people come together. Next slide, please. This is my, I'll make sure we're on the same, to make sure that this is my Uncle Ben. Uncle Ben served, great Uncle Ben, excuse me, from 1942 to 1943, and then he also served from 1949 to 1957. This was during the time where the board meetings were held at his house. If any of you who remember or have worked with me on any type of committee, we begin on time and end on time. And I think I adopted my Uncle Ben's policy, because they used to have the JCC meetings at his house on Springdale Road, and he would sit in his big chair in the sunroom, and I remember this, and he would sit there and he would say, whatever you can't get done in an hour, whatever you can't get done in an hour isn't worth talking about. Am I right? So anyway, he would get up at the end of the, if the meetings weren't over, they were in his house, he would get up, he'd walk upstairs and go to bed, and he'd say, lock up the door when you're done. So now you know where that comes from in my history. Ben was also one of the industrialists, as it was portrayed on the side of the building of the Yorktown Hotel. I heard there was a lot of controversy about that, because typically back then, industrialists were not Jewish. When Ben was the first Jewish board member of the Drovers and Mechanics Bank, this is not a knock on this is just history, okay? It's not a knock on anybody's bank. They had to move from the Lafayette Club because the Lafayette Club at that point would not allow Jews and blacks unless you were serving. It's true. So Ben and his brother Sam, now Sam wouldn't have any pictures of him taken, so there's really nothing of him. But Sam and Ben contributed about 3/4 of the funding for the 1989 building when this building was built. That's what they believed, that was their mission in life. This picture of this painting was found, in a locker room somewhere during my daughter's administration. We'll talk about that too later. And it was in a warehouse, type thing. So they asked me if I wanted it, and I said, thank you very much. And we donated it to the History Center, which now is the beginning of the Jewish history that's going to be taking place at the History Center sometime over the next couple of years. So thank you to that. Next slide, please. So this is my daughter, Princess. By the way, when she was inaugurated, her mom and I brought her roses. And when we presented her with the roses when she was inaugurated, Bob Grossman said, you're never too old to have your parents embarrass you. So I figured I'd put the little princess in there. But she is now the 3rd generation of Lavitans to serve, and during 2016 to 2018. And then the next slide, please. Les, I'm having a lot of fun with you tonight, okay? So this is from the food festival, all right? One of the last food festivals would have been between 2016 and 2018, where we worked on. I was the first sandwich maker along with Herschel Forner. That name sound familiar to somebody? And we made the sandwiches together. So I'm going to encourage all of you. Les, here we go. I'm going to encourage all of you that when you see Les, do you see Les? Wave your hand. There it is. Good man. When you see him, tell him we need the food festival back. We need that. That's the biggest outreach to the community. Please. Somebody started. We can figure out the volunteers. We can figure out all the logistics that go with it, but it is the biggest outreach from the JCC. So I couldn't resist with that picture of Danny and I at the last one. So let's go to the next slide, please. So this is Lucas Caceres. He will be the 6th generation of the family. If any of you recall during the mornings right post-COVID, we were, times changed. We didn't have enough people at the JCC. We needed to make changes. So every morning from 6 o'clock to 6:30, he and I would come up here. We would race cars in this room right here. We'd play basketball, we'd play football, we'd do all kinds of stuff. And so that's where that was taken. So as it says up there, his presidency has not been determined, but let's hope that that's a 6th generation of someone from the family being president. So now we'll come back to the 4 chaplains, if you would go to the next slide. I mentioned Bernie Seville, Harry Welbert, Ivan Butler also was included in this. This was the National Jewish Monthly. The JCC's mission has has been for All Faiths to come together, and it made the headlines of National Jewish Monthly, where it was acknowledged as the first non-denominational Boy Scout troop. Hard to imagine back there that it really was segregated, but this made national headlines right here, it was a phenomenal, again, I think, as Gordon said, Rabbi Good was way ahead of his time. My guess is that the family probably funded a good bit of the Boy Scouts, as you'll see in just a second. Let's go to the next slide. So anybody in our my age bracket, you don't sleep well, okay? So one night, 8, 9, 10 years ago, whatever it was, you go, what do you do when you don't sleep well? You go to Facebook, you go to watch an old movie, you do something along those lines. So anyway, I'm surfing through Facebook, and all of a sudden, this picture shows up. The picture was sent, was with George Kane, that's a local name too, okay? Former attorney and local historian. He looked at the picture, and I'm not sure why it caught my attention, but with the arrow down, that's my father, okay? And I'm looking at this, and there was a couple of other pictures in there, but he was a big Boy Scout. He was one scout, one badge away from he being an Eagle Scout. Interesting enough, when I saw Harry Welber last, because he was the Boy Scout leader, he told me that my dad had always contributed to the camp. This was called Wildcat. I'm not sure what it was during the 50s and 60s, but he would make sure, actually all the family wouldn't tell each other about it, but they all donated to get kids to go to Boy Scout camp. So that's how this all started out. So I didn't go back to sleep. I ended up looking at these pictures forever. But anyway, that's part of the history as well. Let's go to the next slide. This was the room that was rented to JCC. This was the Boy Scout troop where they met. Same picture that Gordon showed just a little bit ago. So now we'll have a little fun if we go to the next slide. Okay, so let's see, that would be my left, your right. So, okay, I'll try and get this. But you can see where Marilyn Hollander, remember we mentioned the word Hollander? If you want to go down to George Street, across from the post office, there's a business there called Rosen Electronics. Henry Rosen and Aaron Rosen, longtime families here. If you walk in and look at that building, you look down, that says Hollander in the tile, okay? That's where the first, I'm going to misquote that. That's where Hollander is one of the 36 auto parts store actually probably got started. So then if you think about Marilyn Hollander and her sister was Evelyn Mailman, to Stanley Mailman. So see how all this is kind of all kept close together here? But that's the Hollander family. That's obviously with Rabbi Good. Elaine Seville is to the right. Elaine Seville ended up marrying Danny Blank. Danny Blank, home of realtors on corner of Duke Street and Market Street. Elaine Seville, and I remember this so clearly because I was part of, during my time here, Elaine was the first Marine of the first 300 women Marines that entered World War II. She had made the rank of captain. And Danny always had the fun part of when he would, it was probably in this room during one of those food festivals. Danny would come in and he would say, do you know my wife? Now, I've only met her 7,000 times, right? But he would still say that, and he would say, yeah, I went out of the Army as a private, and she's a captain. And he would salute her. It was just the most wonderful thing in the world. But anyway, Elaine was a soldier and, was one of the first 300 women, not obviously active combat, and I'm not sure what the role was, but I've got all the history behind it. So that was from 1939. Let's go to the next one. I'm told I can't embarrass anyone here, but I'm gonna try not to. But Phyllis, if you look on the, let's see, on the left-hand side, the big tall guy, that's your dad. Where's Phyllis at? I saw her, there she is, yep. That's Bennett Williams. Next to her, okay, for anybody, Betty Dresner, who did all the plays and everything, and that many generations went through. Betty Dresner was right next to this has been probably a confirmation class, I would assume. And then the Langmeyer family, then Rabbi Good, and then Bennett Miller. Bennett Miller was I want to bring this up, about 4 years ago, got a call from the county commissioner, Julie Wheeler. Said she got a letter from someone in Florida, his father's not doing well, didn't know anything, wanted to find out about the 4 chaplains and that sort. And I got the letter, and you hear that sound? Thank you. I just wanted to let you know when I'm going to step away. Is everybody still good with my voice here? Usually that's not a problem. From the time I started talking to the time that alarm went off was 22 minutes. That's how long it took Dorchester to sink and kill 700. That's how long you had. And they were in the bottom of the boat, they were all in hammocks, it's 15 levels high. They were told, because it was cold, and there was warnings of German U-boats. They were told, put all your clothes on in case you have to, keep them on. But it was so hot down there, and they're down there with the engines and that sort, they did. And many of them were still in their, boxers and that sort. So I try and do that exercise every time I talk about the 4 chaplains, because I don't think anybody really realizes from the time I started talking to the time that alarm went off is how long they had before that boat was underwater. So think about that and their heroism. So we'll go back to Bennett Miller, I got the call and got the letter, and Bennett said, yeah, I grew up on East Market Street. I said, that's funny, I'm on East Market Street right now. What address? Whatever the address was, 3325, I think it was. I said, well, that's really strange. I am sitting in a meeting, I was renting some space. I said, I'm sitting in that house. And his bedroom was upstairs. So we ended up writing a nice piece, and we sent a whole bunch of things to him, and he was thrilled to have some information about the 4 chaplains. And then, as Gordon had mentioned a little bit earlier, at the bottom right, white pants, black sport coat, Donnie Epstein, or excuse me, Uncle Donald. Didn't want to do that disrespectfully. That was Donald Epstein, one of the 4 Epstein brothers, okay, that Gordon had referenced about building houses. Let's go on to the next one. So in this one, I'm sorry if I'm blocking anybody here. The third one over is Rita Kitt. Rita Kitt was Rita Langer, Dr. Mort Langer's wife, okay? And then, let's see, down to the next line, Norma Erdos. Now, Norma, that's not the Norma we're all thinking of. I think that was her mother-in-law. So I think they had the same name. And then on the end, Robert Chuck, Bob Chuck. So there's all these really cool names that went on to do businesses here in York, and that was the tie to Rabbi Good. I just kind of like bringing all that together because these are local names. Everyone's been in Mailmans. So probably some people been in Hollanders. I heard about Jack's, and all the different businesses in there, including the business L. Laviton and Sons, which is now CSR. So it's kind of fun to watch all that and to watch the history of that. So let's move on to the next slide. This is the artist's rendition on West Market Street. We are in the process of trying to find something else that we're going to be doing. A new fundraising project will be announced in the 24 breakfast. Did I tell you that it was May 8th? Did I tell you it starts at 7 a.m.? And did I say you can always contact us at, to find tickets as well? Oh, thank you, Gordon. Put me on the spot. The hotel. Wyndham, thank you. This stuff that wasn't in the agreement I signed when I said about getting older. You just draw a blank. So this is really important. I've had some fun with this, and I love the closeness. But the next slide, none of this would have been possible. I know you don't like it, so you don't have a choice. So just sit and enjoy it. But I took over for either Gordon or Alan, really doesn't matter, and Glenn Miller, as they had retired after, how many years did you do it? 25 years. And then we took over about the last 7 or 8 years. Alan Damashek was the executive director of the JCC. Someone reminded me about, he would walk around the JCC with, on his tie, he would have his notes. He would have little Post-it notes, but did he staple them? Yes, he did. He stapled them on his tie. So by the end of the day, it was kind of like, just had all of that on there. The history of everything that we've talked about here today, it's fun. We've had a lot of laughs with it, but we can't forget that history. That history is what takes us forward. History is what makes us learn from our mistakes. And from things like this, when you have service over self, we have created an organization where we took it from one breakfast with sponsorships to actually 2 breakfasts. And now our goal